They blocked my path to promotion, thinking they'd buried me in corporate obscurity, but they never imagined their stupid decisions would bring down their entire careers. One email, one slide, one beautiful number. And I knew I had the perfect weapon in my hands. They smiled in that boardroom, confident in their power plays. Little did they know I was already documenting every falsified metric, every manipulated report, the retention numbers they celebrated, complete fiction. And I had the receipts. My name is Emily Carter, and I've spent 4 years building the retention framework that kept NextCore Analytics alive. 4 years of 12-hour days, missed dinners, and canceled plans. 4 years of watching our churn rate drop from 32% to 8%. My work, my models, my sleepless nights. The meeting was scheduled for 3:30 p.m. on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and disappointment. Richard Hale's corner office overlooked downtown Seattle. All glass and chrome and calculated intimidation. I'd been in this room dozens of times, usually to present another quarter of stellar retention metrics. This time felt different. His assistant had used the word private twice in the calendar invite. "Emily, please sit." Richard didn't look up from his monitor. The man had perfected the art of making you feel invisible while staring right through you. His Yale diploma hung crooked behind him. I'd noticed it 6 months ago and never said anything. Small rebellions. "I'll cut to the chase," he said, finally swiveling to face me. "The senior analyst position, it's not happening." The words hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette. Nobody was allowed to smoke in this building. I'd prepared for this possibility, rehearsed my professional response, but hearing it still felt like swallowing glass. "May I ask why?" My voice stayed steady. Years of customer escalation calls had taught me that skill. Tyler Moore has shown exceptional leadership potential. He's been here 8 months, but sometimes fresh perspective is what we need. Richard's fingers drummed on his desk. Morse code for, "This conversation is over." Tyler Moore, the Harvard MBA who couldn't tell the difference between cohort analysis and a coffee order. The same Tyler who'd asked me, twice, to explain what customer lifetime value meant. The Tyler who wore his incompetence like designer cologne, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. "I see." 2 words. I wouldn't give Richard more than that. "Additionally," he continued, and there it was. The additionally that meant the knife was coming back for a second stab. "Tyler will be taking over the primary retention initiatives. We need you to focus on something more. Strategic." Strategic, in corporate speak. That meant invisible, meaningless, the kind of project they gave to people they wanted to forget about. "Project Beacon," Richard said, sliding a thin folder across his desk. "Internal loyalty program. Very important for employee engagement." I opened the folder. 3 pages, Comic Sans font. Someone had literally copy-pasted from a Wikipedia article about employee satisfaction. This wasn't a project. It was an insult formatted as a PowerPoint deck. "When does Tyler transition into the retention role?" I asked, already knowing my models would be butchered within a week. "Immediately. Please ensure all documentation is transferred by end of day Thursday." 4 years of work, 48 hours to hand it over. The math was almost poetic in its cruelty. I stood, folder in hand, maintaining the same expression I used during layoff announcements. Professional sympathy mixed with personal detachment. "I'll make sure the transition is smooth." "I knew you would." Richard was already turning back to his monitor. "You're a team player, Emily. That's always been your strength." Team player, code for doormat, code for someone who takes the hit and says thank you. I walked back to my desk, passing Tyler's cubicle, where he was loudly explaining to someone on the phone how he'd revolutionize our retention strategy with some real innovation. He'd actually used the phrase paradigm shift 3 times in 2 minutes. Sitting at my desk, I pulled up the retention dashboard I'd built from scratch. Every formula, every visualization, every automated report. My digital fingerprints were all over this system. Tyler would inherit it all, claim credit for it all, and probably break it all within a month. But Richard had made a mistake, a big one. In making my transition smooth, I'd have to document everything, every process, every data source, every single decision point in our retention model. And if I happened to notice some discrepancies in how Tyler was already reporting his preliminary findings to leadership, well, Documentation was all about accuracy, wasn't it? I opened a new folder on my desktop, named it Transition Materials. Then I created a second folder, hidden deep in my personal directory structure. I called it Echo. Because every sound, no matter how quiet, creates an echo if you know how to listen for it. The door Richard had slammed in my face today would echo, and when it did, the sound would be deafening. Project Beacon was housed in what we called the Innovation Lab, a windowless conference room on the third floor that smelled like abandoned ambition and stale coffee. They'd moved my desk there on Thursday morning while I was in the bathroom. Efficient, humiliating, perfect. The room had one table, 3 broken chairs, and a whiteboard with someone's old brainstorming sessions still visible. Synergy, written in dying red marker. This was corporate exile. NextCore's version of Siberia. I spent the first morning pretending to care about employee loyalty metrics, created 17 PowerPoint slides about engagement touchpoints and satisfaction drivers, used every corporate buzzword I could remember, made the fonts progressively larger until slide 12 was just the word belonging in 72-point Calibri. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with Slack notifications. Tyler had taken over the retention channel. His first message: "Team, excited to bring fresh energy to our retention strategy. Let's disrupt the status quo." Disrupt. He was about to disrupt 4 years of carefully calibrated algorithms with the finesse of a toddler with a hammer. By noon, the first damage report started rolling in. Sarah from Customer Success messaged me privately. "Hey Em, did Tyler just tell you he's removing the cohort segmentation from the monthly reports?" I stared at my screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Cohort segmentation was the backbone of our entire retention model. Without it, you couldn't track which customer groups were churning or why. It would be like trying to navigate using a map with no landmarks. "I'm on Project Beacon now," I replied. "Tyler owns retention." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Sarah knew bullshit when she smelled it. From my exile, I watched Tyler's massacre unfold in real time through Slack. Email chains I was mysteriously still copied on, and the occasional horrified drive-by from former teammates. "He just told the data team to stop adjusting for attribution lag," Marcus from Analytics whispered, standing in my doorway like he was visiting someone in prison. "Says it makes the numbers too complicated." Attribution lag, the 3 to 5 day delay between customer action and system recording. Without adjusting for it, our retention rates would look artificially inflated for days, then crash when reality caught up. Tyler was essentially putting makeup on a corpse and calling it alive. I nodded, turned back to my screen where I was designing a loyalty program newsletter nobody would ever send. Not my circus anymore, Marcus. But I was lying. It was still my circus. I'd built every tent pole, strung every wire, and now I was watching a clown set it all on fire. 2 weeks into my Beacon imprisonment, Tyler held his first Retention Revolution meeting. I wasn't invited, but the conference room was directly above my exile chamber. Sound traveled through these floors like gossip through an open office. "Traditional retention metrics are dead," I heard him declare. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never had to explain a churn spike to the board. "We need to think bigger, bolder. Stop focusing on the customers who leave and celebrate the ones who stay." Sweet Christ, he was actually suggesting we ignore churn rate. I pulled up our retention dashboard on my laptop. My credentials still worked. It was notoriously slow with access revocations. The real numbers told a different story than Tyler's enthusiasm. Churn was creeping up. Week 1, 8.3%. Week 2, 9.1%. Week 3, 10.7%. But the reports Tyler was sending to leadership steady at 8%. Miraculous. I started taking screenshots, every dashboard, every report, every metric, saved them in my Echo folder with timestamps. Tyler was playing with the numbers like a kid with Play-Doh, smoothing out the uncomfortable bumps, reshaping reality to match his narrative. The isolation of Project Beacon became my advantage. Nobody visited the Innovation Lab. Nobody cared what the exile was doing with her time. I had 8 hours a day to document the slow-motion disaster, to build my loyalty program that existed only in increasingly absurd PowerPoints, and to watch Tyler turn my precision instrument into a broken toy. On Friday of week 3, I created my masterpiece, a 73-slide deck about Project Beacon, complete with implementation timelines, budget projections, and a section called Measuring the Unmeasurable, the ROI of Joy. It was corporate performance art. I sent it to Richard with a note. Excited to share Beacon's progress, really feeling the strategic importance. He replied within minutes, "Excellent work, Emily. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." He hadn't opened the attachment. The email tracking pixel told me that much. I leaned back in my broken chair, staring at the ceiling where someone had taped a motivational poster, "Teamwork," over a photo of rowing crew. One of the rowers had been drawn a mustache. Tyler was destroying my work. Richard was enabling him, and I was supposedly designing a loyalty program for employees who were watching their company's retention model collapse in real time. But every collapsed number, every fudged report, every revolutionary decision that ignored basic mathematics, I documented it all. My Echo folder grew larger each day, a digital monument to incompetence and deception. Project Beacon was my prison, but it was also my watchtower, and from here, I could see everything. The October all-hands meeting was Tyler's coronation. He stood at the front of the main conference room, clicker in hand, smile wide enough to sell insurance. The Q3 retention numbers glowed behind him on the screen. Retention rate 92.4%, a next core record. I sat in the back row, invisible among the 100 faces pretending to care. The real retention rate was 87.6%. I knew because I'd pulled the raw data that morning at 5:45 a.m., before Tyler had a chance to apply his creative mathematics. "Through innovative approaches and fresh perspectives," Tyler said, clicking to his next slide, "we've revolutionized how we think about customer retention." Richard nodded from the front row like a proud father at a recital. The rest of the leadership team scribbled notes, probably writing "promote this genius" in their moleskins. What Tyler had actually done was simple. He'd changed the definition of churned customer. Instead of counting anyone who hadn't engaged in 30 days, he'd extended it to 45. Instead of including all customer segments, he'd quietly excluded the low-value tier that made up 40% of our base. He'd turned our retention formula into a magic 8-ball that always said, "Outlook good." But I noticed something Tyler hadn't. People were starting to whisper. It started in billing. Amy Fitzgerald sent an email to her team, CCing half the company by accident. "Can someone explain why our retained customer revenue is down 12%, but retention is supposedly up?" Then customer success started asking questions. They were the ones actually talking to customers, hearing the complaints, processing the cancellations. They knew something was rotting, even if they couldn't identify the source of the smell. I began leaving breadcrumbs, not accusations. That would be too obvious. Just questions, posed innocently in the right Slack channels. "Hey, does anyone know if we changed our churn calculation methodology, trying to update some old documentation for Project Beacon and want to make sure I'm aligned?" Random question. Are we still including all customer segments in our retention metrics, building a loyalty framework, and need to understand our full audience? Silly question, but did our reporting period change from 30 to 45 days? Saw some conflicting numbers and want to make sure Beacon aligns with company standards. Each question was a small crack in Tyler's facade. People started comparing notes. The data team pulled their own reports. Customer success created a shadow dashboard to track what they were actually seeing. The beauty was that I never accused anyone of anything. I was just the exile working on her meaningless project, asking innocent questions to stay informed. Meanwhile, my Echo folder had evolved into something more sophisticated. I'd started building parallel reports, what Tyler showed leadership versus what the data actually said. The gap was widening every week. Week 5. Tyler reported 92.8% retention. Reality 86.9%. Week 6. Tyler's version showed 93.1%. Reality 85.4%. Week 7. Tyler hit 94%. Reality crashed to 83.7%. He was painting himself into a corner, and he didn't even know it. Each inflated number required more manipulation to maintain. Each lie needed 3 more to support it. It was a Jenga tower of deception, and I was documenting every wobbly piece. I also started noticing patterns in the raw data logs. Tyler was making changes late at night, usually between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. The timestamp showed his user ID running SQL queries to update historical data, smoothing out inconvenient truths. He was literally rewriting history. But here's the thing about databases: they keep logs, deep in the system tables. Every change was recorded, who changed what, when, and what the value was before. Tyler might have been editing the numbers, but he couldn't edit the edit history. I pulled those logs every morning at 6 a.m., before its daily maintenance could potentially overwrite them, saved them in Echo, organized by date and change type, built a timeline that showed exactly how our record-breaking retention was manufactured. The Thursday before the quarterly board review, I did something bold. I created an anonymous email account and sent a single message to Lauren Simmons, our chief of staff. The subject line: discrepancy in retention reporting. The body was just 3 sentences. The retention metrics being reported to leadership don't match the raw database values. The actual Q3 retention rate is 83.7%, not 94%. The query logs show systematic alterations to historical data between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. No accusations, no evidence attached, just enough to make someone curious. I watched from my innovation lab prison as Lauren walked past, her face tight with concentration. She went straight to the analytics team's area, closed the door behind her. 2 hours later, the analytics team's Slack channel exploded with activity. They'd started pulling their own reports, comparing them to Tyler's presentations. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore once you knew to look for them. Sarah from Customer Success messaged me. You seeing what's happening in analytics? I'm in the innovation lab working on Beacon, I replied. What's going on? Someone's been cooking the books. The retention numbers are completely fucked. I allowed myself a small smile in my windowless room. That's concerning. Good thing it's not my problem anymore. But we both knew better. This had my fingerprints all over it, not on the crime, but on the revelation. I'd spent weeks laying the groundwork, planting seeds of doubt, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to the truth. The November board review was in 3 days. Tyler had promised to present revolutionary Q4 projections based on his proven success. I updated my Echo folder one more time, backing it up to 3 different locations. The evidence was complete, comprehensive, and irrefutable. Every altered number, every timestamp, every impossible metric that Tyler had conjured from thin air. The cracks were spreading, the whispers were getting louder, and Tyler was about to stand in front of the board and build his entire case on a foundation of lies that was already crumbling. I opened a new PowerPoint for Project Beacon. Slide 1: Loyalty is built on truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. The allies came to me quietly, like refugees seeking shelter in my innovation lab exile. They never said they were allies. That would be too dangerous. But they came with questions, observations, and most importantly, their own pieces of evidence. Marcus from Analytics was first. He knocked on my doorframe at 7:20 a.m. on Monday, coffee in hand, looking like he hadn't slept. Emily, hypothetically, he started, which was how all our conversations began now. If someone were to notice that retention calculations were being run twice, once at normal processing time and once after midnight, what would you make of that? I didn't look up from my Beacon presentation. Hypothetically, I'd wonder why anyone would need to recalculate completed metrics. He set a USB drive on my desk. Hypothetically, someone might have saved those calculation logs, both versions. After he left, I plugged in the drive. 23 instances of double calculations, each showing the original metric and Tyler's adjusted version. Marcus had even highlighted the deltas. Beautiful. Then came Amy from billing. She didn't even pretend with hypotheticals. The revenue numbers don't match the customer counts, she said, standing in my doorway like she was afraid to fully enter. If we really retained 94% of customers, our recurring revenue should be up. It's down 8%. That's concerning, I said, maintaining my neutral expression. Have you mentioned this to Tyler? She laughed, bitter and short. Tyler told me I was using outdated financial models. Said his new approach doesn't follow traditional revenue correlations. Interesting theory. Bullshit theory. She pulled out her phone, showed me a graph she'd built. Look, I mapped revenue to reported retention for the last 5 years. Perfect correlation until, guess when? 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago. I took a photo of her graph with my personal phone. Another piece for Echo. The most unexpected ally was Janet from Legal. She appeared at 4:15 p.m. on Tuesday, closing the door behind her, a first for anyone visiting the Innovation Lab. "I need to ask you something off the record," she said, voice low. "I'm just working on Project Beacon. Janet, I don't have any records anymore." She studied me for a long moment. "Someone sent an anonymous tip to the SEC whistleblower hotline about potential financial reporting irregularities at NextCore. My heart rate stayed steady. I'd practiced for this. That's serious." "It is, especially since the complaint specifically mentions retention metrics being used to inflate company valuation before the Q4 investor call." She paused. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "I've been in this room for 8 weeks designing a loyalty program that doesn't exist. What would I know about retention metrics?" Janet smiled, thin and knowing. "Right. Well, if someone were gathering evidence of financial fraud, they should know that the SEC takes these things very seriously, especially when there's a clear pattern of deception." After she left, I sat in silence for 10 minutes. I hadn't contacted the SEC, which meant someone else had independently arrived at the same conclusion. The house of cards wasn't just wobbling. Multiple people were pulling different cards simultaneously. Wednesday brought the most satisfying visitor, Tyler himself. He strutted in at 2:30 p.m., wearing his confidence like an expensive suit that didn't quite fit. "Emily, I need the historical retention models, the ones from before my optimization." I looked up slowly. "I transferred everything to you 8 weeks ago, as requested. I need the originals, the raw SQL queries, the data sources, the segmentation logic." "Why?" His jaw tightened. "The analytics team is being difficult. They claim my numbers don't match some theoretical baseline. I need to show them how outdated their thinking is." "I see." I turned to my computer, pulled up a folder labeled Transferred Assets Archive. "I can send you exactly what I gave you 8 weeks ago. But Tyler, you should know, those models include all the validation checks and audit trails. Every calculation is logged and verified against source data." His face paled slightly. "I don't need all that. Just the basic formulas." "The formulas don't work without the validation framework. They're interdependent. You can't separate them without breaking the entire model." He was starting to sweat. "Then send me a simplified version." "I can't simplify math. Tyler, it either adds up or it doesn't." He left without another word, but I saw him pull Richard into a conference room immediately after. Through the glass, I watched Tyler gesticulating wildly while Richard's face grew progressively darker. That evening, Sarah from Customer Success created a Slack channel called Hatch Data Integrity. Within an hour, it had 43 members. The conversation was careful, professional, but the subtext was clear. Everyone knew something was wrong. Marcus posted, "Anyone else notice discrepancies between source data and reported metrics?" Amy responded, "Billing has identified several inconsistencies." Development chimed in, "We've been asked to modify calculation scripts 3 times this month. Each modification moves further from industry standards." They were building their own case, independent of my Echo folder. The beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't need coordination. Once people start looking for it, they find it everywhere. I added one final breadcrumb to the channel. For those tracking changes, the database maintains 90-day logs of all queries and modifications. It can pull historical snapshots if needed for comparison. It was like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline fumes. Within minutes, 3 different teams were requesting historical data pulls from IT. Tyler was drowning, and every attempt to swim just pulled him deeper. The November board review was tomorrow, and he'd promised to present Q4 projections based on his revolutionary success. But his success was fiction, and fiction has a terrible habit of collapsing when reality shows up with receipts. I saved my work on Project Beacon, slide 47 trust the ultimate loyalty metric, and smiled at the empty room. Tomorrow, Tyler would stand in front of the board with his beautiful lies, and all around him, his invisible allies would be watching, waiting, armed with truth. We didn't need to coordinate. We didn't need to conspire. We just needed to let reality speak for itself. And reality, as it turned out, had quite a lot to say. The data trap was elegant in its simplicity. I'd spent 3 weeks building it, layer by layer, each component invisible until you stepped back and saw the whole picture. It started with a temporary access request. It had sent a routine email about system maintenance, asking department heads to verify user permissions. Richard, drowning in Tyler's escalating panic, had rubber-stamped everything without reading, including my request to maintain read-only access for Project Beacon integration purposes. Read-only, the most beautiful 2 words in corporate IT. It meant I could see everything but technically touch nothing. Plausible deniability wrapped in bureaucratic approval. At 11:45 p.m. on Wednesday, 12 hours before the board review, I executed my plan. First, I reconstructed the actual retention model, the real one, the one I'd built over 4 years. Every calculation, every segment, every validation check, running against the current data. The process took 3 hours. The terminal window scrolling with numbers that told the truth Tyler had been desperately hiding. The results were worse than even I'd expected. Real retention 79.4%. We'd lost 1 in 5 customers while Tyler was reporting record-breaking success. But the numbers were just the foundation. The real trap was in the comparison. I created a split-screen dashboard, something so simple a junior analyst could build it in an hour. On the left, Tyler's reported metrics for the last 8 weeks. On the right, the actual metrics from the same period. The visualization was devastating. Tyler's smooth upward curve versus reality's jagged decline. His steady green versus reality's alarming red. His 94% versus reality's 79%. But I needed more than just numbers. I needed to show the mechanism of the lie. So I pulled the query logs, the ones Marcus had been quietly collecting. I created a timeline visualization showing every midnight modification, every altered calculation, every optimization Tyler had made. Each change was tagged with his user ID, timestamp, and the before-after values. It looked like a crime scene map, each point connected to the next, showing the clear progression from small adjustments to massive fraud. Then came the masterpiece, the attribution analysis. I showed what happened when you applied Tyler's methodology to historical data. According to his calculations, NextCore should have had 112% retention in Q2 2019. We'd somehow retained more customers than we'd ever had. The impossibility was obvious to anyone who understood basic math, which, hopefully, included our board of directors. I packaged everything into a single file. Retention Validation Analysis Q3 2024.pdf. 47 pages of charts, graphs, and time-stamped evidence. No commentary, no accusations, just data presenting itself with ruthless clarity. At 3:15 a.m., I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I accessed our shared drive and created a new folder in the Analytics public directory, Q3 Retention Validation. I set the permissions to read only for all staff. Then I uploaded the file and went home. I didn't send any emails, didn't alert anyone, just left the door open for anyone curious enough to look. By 7 a.m., the view count was at 12. By 8 a.m., 43. By 9 a.m., the entire analytics team had downloaded it. The Data Integrity Slack channel exploded. Holy shit, look at page 23. The timestamp analysis starts on page 31. This is insane. How did we not catch this earlier? We did. We just didn't have the complete picture. I sat in my innovation lab, working on Project Beacon slide 52, Transparency Builds Trust. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I didn't read. My expression remained neutral as people walked past my door, whispering urgently. At 10 a.m., Lauren Simmons, the chief of staff, appeared in my doorway. Emily, did you create this analysis? She held up a printed copy of my file. I looked at it with practiced confusion. What analysis? I've been working on Project Beacon. She studied me carefully. This validation report, it shows significant discrepancies in our retention reporting. Oh, that sounds concerning. Is it related to the questions people have been asking in the Data Integrity channel? You're in that channel. I joined to ensure Project Beacon aligns with company data standards. It's important for the loyalty program to use accurate metrics. Lauren's expression was unreadable. The board review is in 3 hours. Richard is looking for Tyler. Have you seen him? Not today. But then, people don't usually visit the innovation lab. She left without another word. Through the glass walls, I could see the executive floor in chaos. Richard was on the phone, pacing. Tyler's desk was empty. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus appeared. Tyler's trying to discredit the validation analysis. Says it uses outdated methodology. Does it? It uses his exact methodology, applied correctly. I allowed myself a small smile. Funny how math works that way. The trap was complete. Tyler couldn't argue with the analysis without admitting he understood the correct methodology. He couldn't dismiss it without explaining why his numbers differed so dramatically. He couldn't claim ignorance because the query logs showed deliberate, systematic changes. He was trapped by his own expertise, or lack thereof. At noon, 30 minutes before the board review, I received an email from Richard. Subject: Urgent Retention Analysis Review. Emily, please bring all Project Beacon materials to the boardroom immediately. I printed all 73 slides of my meaningless loyalty program, put them in a folder labeled Project Beacon Building Tomorrow's Engagement Today, and walked to the elevator. The trap wasn't just the data, it was the timing. Tyler had 12 hours to review 47 pages of evidence. He'd had 8 weeks to prepare his fiction. The board was expecting his Q4 projections in 30 minutes. He could try to explain the discrepancies, but that would mean admitting they existed. He could attack the analysis, but that would mean acknowledging its accuracy. He could blame others, but the query logs had his name on every change. Or he could present his fiction to a room full of people who'd just seen the truth. I stood in the elevator, watching the floors count up, folder in hand. 8 weeks ago, Richard had closed a door in my face. Today, I was about to walk through it with 73 slides of corporate nonsense and a USB drive containing the complete Echo folder. Just in case anyone asked about data integrity and loyalty programs, the elevator dinged. 12th floor, executive level. The trap was set. The data was free. The truth was spreading like wildfire through NextCore's Slack channels and shared drives. And I was just an exile with a PowerPoint about employee loyalty, walking into a board review where retention was about to become the least of Richard's problems. The morning of the board review, I arrived at 6:45 a.m. The office was empty except for security and the overnight cleaning crew. I made coffee in the executive kitchen, the good stuff they kept locked away from regular employees, and settled into a corner of the lobby where I could watch everyone arrive. Richard came in at 7:30, phone pressed to his ear, his face the color of expired milk. Tyler arrived 10 minutes later, carrying 3 laptops and looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. He'd definitely seen the validation analysis. By 8 a.m., the whispers had become a roar. The Hatch Data Integrity Channel had grown to 112 members. Someone had tagged the CEO. The validation analysis had been downloaded 243 times. But the real explosion came at 9 a.m. when someone, I never found out who, forwarded the analysis to our largest investor group. Within minutes, Richard was pulled into an emergency call with the board's audit committee. I continued working on Project Beacon, adding slide 74, Crisis Creates Opportunity. At 10:15 a.m., Lauren Simmons sent an email I'd been expecting but Tyler hadn't. To all staff, CC Board of Directors from Lauren Simmons. Chief of Staff subject, postponement of Q4 quarterly business review. Due to urgent matters requiring leadership attention, today's QBR has been postponed to Monday. All prepared materials should be submitted to my office by 5 p.m. today for review. Tyler's Q4 projections, built on 8 weeks of fictional success, were now going to be pre-reviewed by people who'd seen the validation analysis, by people who knew how to read data. The beauty was that I hadn't sent the analysis to Lauren or the board. I'd simply made it available. The organic discovery, the viral spread through the company, the investor notification. It all happened naturally, like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. At 11 a.m., an emergency meeting was called, mandatory for all analytics, customer success, and billing staff, optional for everyone else. I marked myself as attending remotely from the innovation lab and dialed in. Richard's voice came through the speaker, tight with barely controlled panic. There have been questions raised about our Q3 retention metrics. We're conducting a thorough review to ensure all reporting meets our highest standards of accuracy. Someone unmuted. Brave soul. Is this about the validation analysis? Silence. Then Richard, we're reviewing all materials. Tyler Moore will be leading the investigation to ensure complete transparency. The call erupted, multiple people unmuting at once, voices overlapping. Tyler, he's the one who... The query logs show... This is insane. Richard ended the call. 5 minutes later, Tyler appeared in my doorway. First time he'd visited the innovation lab since his triumph 8 weeks ago. You did this, he said, voice low and dangerous. I looked up from slide 76, accountability as a core value. Did what? The analysis, the leak. You're trying to destroy me. Tyler, I've been in this room for 8 weeks working on a loyalty program. I don't have access to retention systems anymore. You made sure of that. But you built the validation model. Someone built a validation model, using standard methodology, the kind any competent analyst would use. I paused. Let that sink in. Is there a problem with the validation model? His face contorted. He wanted to say yes, but that would mean explaining why his numbers didn't match. He wanted to say no, but that would mean accepting its conclusions. This isn't over, he finally managed. I agree. The board review is Monday. I'm sure you'll have time to explain the discrepancies by then. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the dying whiteboard. At 2 p.m., Janet from legal appeared with 2 other people I didn't recognize. Dark suits, serious faces, definitely not NextCore employees. Emily, these gentlemen are from Deloitte. They've been retained to conduct an independent audit of our Q3 reporting. They'd like to discuss your understanding of our retention metrics. I smiled. Of course, though I should mention, I've been working exclusively on Project Beacon for the past 8 weeks. My knowledge might be outdated. The older Deloitte partner, silver-haired with eyes like a tax audit, pulled out a tablet. We understand you built the original retention framework. Yes, 4 years ago. It's been extensively modified since then. By whom? Tyler Moore took over 8 weeks ago. He mentioned something about revolutionary improvements. They exchanged glances. Would you be able to reconstruct the original model for comparison purposes? I pretended to think. I suppose I could. The fundamental mathematics shouldn't have changed. 2 plus 2 still equals 4, after all. We'd appreciate that. How long would you need? Oh, I could probably pull something together by end of day. The math is actually quite simple when you follow standard methodology. At 4:45 p.m., I submitted 2 documents to Lauren Simmons's office. The first was my complete Project Beacon presentation, all 78 slides of corporate nonsense about loyalty programs that would never exist. The second was a USB drive labeled Original Retention Framework Documentation for audit purposes. It contained the complete Echo folder, every timestamp, every query log, every before and after comparison, every piece of evidence showing how Tyler had systematically destroyed my work while lying to everyone about it. But more importantly, it contained the reconstructed model showing what our retention should have looked like with proper management. We could have maintained 88% retention. Instead, we were at 79% and falling. The difference about $42 million in lost revenue. At 5 p.m., as I was packing up, Lauren appeared one more time. Emily, the board has requested you attend Monday's review. To present Project Beacon. She almost smiled. To present whatever you think is relevant to understanding our Q3 performance. I nodded. I'll prepare accordingly. That night, Tyler sent a company-wide email. Subject, clarification on retention metrics. It was 3 pages of corporate word salad, explaining how different methodological approaches could yield varying interpretations of success metrics, and how innovation sometimes requires challenging traditional frameworks. The replies started immediately. Reply all. Everyone could see everyone else's response. Marcus, can you clarify which methodology shows 94% retention? Amy, how do you explain the revenue discrepancy? Sarah, which customer segments were excluded from your calculations? Tyler never responded. Saturday morning, the board called an emergency session. By Saturday afternoon, Richard had retained personal legal counsel. By Sunday, Tyler's LinkedIn showed him as seeking new opportunities. But Monday was still coming, and I had a presentation to prepare. Not about Project Beacon, but about what happens when you build something with integrity, watch it get destroyed by incompetence, and keep every receipt along the way. The door Richard had slammed in my face was about to swing wide open, and I had 78 slides about loyalty to show them, plus a USB drive that would explain why Tyler Moore was about to become NextCore's most expensive mistake. Monday arrived wrapped in Seattle rain and corporate dread. I wore my best suit, the charcoal one I'd bought for my interview 4 years ago. It seemed fitting, the beginning and the end in the same fabric. The boardroom was on the 15th floor, all glass and intimidation. I arrived at 8:45 a.m. for the 9 a.m. meeting. The receptionist looked at me with something between pity and curiosity. Everyone knew who I was now, the exile who'd built the bomb that exploded NextCore's leadership. Through the glass, I could see them gathering. Board members I'd only seen in annual reports. The CEO, Patricia Nguyen, studying a tablet with the intensity of someone diffusing an explosive. The CFO, head in his hands. Richard, looking like he'd aged a decade over the weekend. Tyler's chair was empty. At 9 a.m. sharp, Lauren opened the door. "Emily, we're ready for you." I entered carrying 2 things: my Project Beacon folder and a single USB drive. No laptop, no elaborate setup, just paper and digital truth. Patricia Nguyen didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Carter, we've reviewed the materials submitted Friday. Before we begin, is there anything you'd like to disclose about your involvement in recent events?" "Yes," I said, taking my seat at the far end of the table. "I'd like to disclose that I've spent 8 weeks in a windowless room creating a 78-slide presentation about employee loyalty while watching someone destroy 4 years of my work." A board member I didn't recognize leaned forward. "You created the validation analysis." "I created a validation analysis. Anyone with access to the data and basic mathematical competence could have created the same thing." "But they didn't," Patricia said. "Why?" "Because Tyler Moore controlled the narrative. Richard Hale blessed it, and everyone else was too scared to question it." Richard started to speak, but Patricia silenced him with a look that could freeze mercury. "Walk us through Q3, she said. "The real Q3. I opened my Project Beacon folder, but instead of loyalty slides, I pulled out a single sheet of paper, hand-drawn graph, pen and ruler, old school. "This is our actual retention from July 1st to September 30th, 79.4% by standard calculation. Every methodology, every industry benchmark, every historical model confirms this number. And Tyler's 94%. Fiction. He excluded 40% of our customer base, extended the measurement window to hide churn, and when that wasn't enough, he literally rewrote historical data between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. I paused. "I have screenshots of every change." The CFO finally looked up. "How much revenue impact?" $42 million in Q3. Projected $160 million by year-end if the trend continues. The room went silent. Patricia turned to Richard. "You signed off on these numbers." Richard's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Tyler assured me his methodology was revolutionary. "Revolutionary," I interrupted, something I'd never done in 4 years. He couldn't explain the difference between cohort analysis and correlation. He asked me to define customer lifetime value. Twice. "You gave my job to someone who needed me to explain basic retention concepts." "That's not," Richard started. "August 15th, 2:37 p.m., I continued, pulling out my phone. "Tyler sent me this message. Hey Emily, quick question. What's the formula for calculating monthly recurring revenue?" Should I read his other question, September 3rd? Is churn rate supposed to go up or down? September 21st. What's attribution lag again? Each quote landed like a slap. Richard's face went from pale to crimson. Patricia turned to me. "Why didn't you report this earlier?" "To whom, Richard? Who orchestrated it? HR. Who reports to Richard?" "The anonymous reporting system that Richard reviews." I shook my head. "I did something better. I documented everything and let the truth find its own way." The Deloitte partner, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Ms. Carter's reconstruction matches our independent audit exactly. The fraud is systematic and deliberate. Fraud. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Where is Tyler now? A board member asked. He submitted his resignation Saturday night, Lauren said, effective immediately. Resignation not accepted, Patricia said coldly. Legal. I want options for recovery of his compensation and potential criminal referral. Then she turned back to me. The retention framework you built, can it be restored? Yes, but not by me. The room stirred. This wasn't what they expected. I'm done, I said simply. I spent 4 years building something I was proud of, 8 weeks watching it burn. I've proven the truth, but I'm not staying to clean up the mess. Patricia studied me. What would it take for you to stay? I stood up, leaving my beacon folder on the table. There's nothing you could offer. You let Richard give my work to an incompetent fraud because Tyler had the right degree and the right smile. You only care about the truth now because it's costing you money. Emily, Patricia started. No, I pulled out the USB drive, set it on the table. This contains everything. The complete retention framework, documentation, and evidence file. Consider it my exit interview. I walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and Tyler's Q4 projections. He was going to promise 103% retention. We were supposedly going to have more customers than we'd ever sold to. Someone should probably tell investors that's mathematically impossible. Richard finally found his voice. You can't just leave. Watch me. I looked him dead in the eye. 8 weeks ago, you told me I was a team player. You were right. I played for the team. The team was just bigger than you thought. I walked out, leaving them with their fraud, their audits, their $42 million hole. Behind me, I heard Patricia's voice, sharp as winter. Richard, please remain. Everyone else is dismissed. Legal, stay on standby. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone. The Hatch Data Integrity Channel had 200 members now. Someone had posted, Emily Carter is a legend. I smiled, typed a response. Emily Carter is unemployed. Anyone know who's hiring? By the time I reached the lobby, I had 17 interview offers. I pushed through the rotating doors into the Seattle rain. Behind me, NextCore's glass tower stretched toward gray clouds, all that corporate ambition reaching for nothing. Tyler was gone. Richard would follow soon. The board would scramble to explain to investors how they'd let fiction replace fact for an entire quarter. And I was free. No more innovation lab, no more Project Beacon, no more pretending loyalty meant anything in a place that had none. I stood in the rain for a moment, letting it wash away 8 weeks of exile. Then I walked to my car, where a box of personal items waited, packed Friday afternoon when I knew how Monday would end. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Just heard Richard's been suspended pending investigation. Patricia named Lauren interim head of analytics. She wants to know if you'd consult on the rebuild. I sat in my car, heat running, watching the rain streak down the windshield. Thought about Tyler's midnight manipulations, Richard's casual cruelty, the innovation lab with its dying whiteboard and broken chairs. Then I typed back, my consulting rate is $500 per hour, non-negotiable. First invoice 8 weeks retroactive advisory services on Project Beacon. Marcus replied immediately, Lauren says yes. When can you start? I looked back at NextCore's tower, then at the road ahead. Tomorrow, but I work remote. I've spent enough time in windowless rooms. The retention rate was 79.4%. The truth was 100%. And my revenge. Priceless. The aftermath unfolded like dominoes in slow motion, each piece falling with inevitable precision. Tuesday morning, 9:15 a.m. The Seattle Times ran a story about accounting irregularities at NextCore Analytics. They didn't name names, but anyone who could read between the lines knew exactly what had happened. Wednesday. The SEC opened a formal investigation. Tyler Moore was photographed leaving his attorney's office, looking like he'd discovered the real meaning of disruption. Thursday, Richard Hale's resignation letter leaked to TechCrunch. He cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities. The opportunities turned out to be defending himself against a shareholder lawsuit. Friday. Patricia Nguyen announced a complete restructuring of NextCore's analytics division. She also announced the hire of a new chief data officer, someone with unimpeachable integrity and proven expertise. The salary they offered was exactly what I'd asked for 18 months ago, before Richard decided I wasn't leadership material. I watched it all from my home office, consulting at $500 per hour, rebuilding the framework they'd let Tyler destroy. Every invoice I sent included a line item, restoration of unnecessarily damaged systems. Lauren Simmons called me 2 weeks later. The rebuild is ahead of schedule. The board is impressed. Good for them. Emily, I need to tell you something. We found more. I waited. Tyler wasn't just manipulating retention data. He was selling our customer list to competitors. Richard was getting kickbacks. The FBI is now involved. I stared at my laptop screen, where I was building a retention model for a startup that actually valued accuracy. I'm shocked, I said, voice flat as old champagne. You knew. I suspected. The query logs showed external IP addresses accessing customer data at unusual hours. I included those in the Echo folder. Jesus, Emily, you handed us evidence of corporate espionage. I handed you the truth. What you found in it was up to you. There was a pause. The board wants to offer you the Chief Analytics Officer position. Full package, team of 40, report directly to Patricia. 3 months ago, I would have sold my soul for that offer. Now, no. Emily, Lauren, they had to lose $42 million before they cared about the truth. They had to face SEC investigation before they valued competence over connections. They had to watch their stock price crater before they remembered that math doesn't lie. I closed my laptop. I don't want to work for people who need catastrophe to develop integrity. Then what do you want? I thought about the innovation lab, the dying whiteboard, the 78 slides about loyalty that no one ever read. I want to build something where the numbers matter from day one, where retention isn't a metric to manipulate, but a reflection of actual value created. You're starting your own company. I'm starting something. We'll see what it becomes. 6 months later, my consulting firm had 12 clients, all companies that had experienced their own Tyler Moore disasters. I specialized in forensic analytics, finding the lies hidden in the numbers. My team was small, just 5 of us, all refugees from corporate betrayals. Marcus joined first, then Amy, then Sarah. Even Janet from legal came aboard, tired of defending the indefensible. We worked remotely, no office, no innovation labs, no corner offices to covet, just the work, the truth, and the satisfaction of watching fiction crumble under scrutiny. Tyler Moore was eventually charged with 17 counts of fraud and corporate espionage. His LinkedIn still said seeking new opportunities, but the opportunities were mostly about plea bargains. Richard Hale settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. Last I heard, he was teaching business ethics at a community college. The irony was lost on no one. NextCore survived, barely. Patricia brought in new leadership, implemented rigorous audit systems, and slowly rebuilt trust. Their retention rate stabilized at 85%. Respectable, honest, real. They still send me offers sometimes. More money, better titles, promises of autonomy. I delete them all. Because here's what I learned in that windowless room. Building meaningless presentations while watching my work burn revenge isn't about destroying those who wronged you. It's about becoming someone they can't destroy. Tyler thought he was replacing me. Richard thought he was exiling me. They thought they were writing me out of NextCore's story. Instead, they wrote me into legend. The retention rate was 79.4%, but my personal retention rate, the percentage of my soul I kept intact through it all, was 100%. And that's the only metric that matters. I still have the Project Beacon presentation, all 78 slides about loyalty that never mattered to anyone but me. Sometimes I flip through them and laugh at the cosmic joke of it all. Slide 37 still makes me smile. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. Richard lost his bucket. Tyler lost his career. NextCore lost $42 million. And me, I gained everything by losing a job that was already gone. The door they slammed in my face became the exit I needed. The exile they imposed became the freedom I'd never have chosen. And the numbers. The numbers never lied. We did that all by ourselves. My phone buzzes, another company with suspicious metrics, another Tyler Moore thinking he's clever with Excel, another Richard Hale enabling the fiction. I smile, open my laptop, and begin building another trap made of nothing but truth. Because in the end, that's all you need. Truth, time, and the patience to let gravity do its work. The retention rate was 79.4%. The revenge rate, immeasurable. Thank you for listening to my story of corporate revenge and vindication. I'm curious, where are you listening to this story right now? Are you in your office? Perhaps plotting your own escape on your commute, thinking about your own Tyler Moore, or maybe safe at home, grateful to be away from the corporate battlefield. Drop a comment and let me know. I'd love to hear where in the world these tales of workplace justice are reaching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories of people who refuse to be destroyed by corporate politics. And please, share your own thoughts and experiences below. Have you ever had to deal with a Tyler Moore, a Richard Hale? Or have you been the Emily? Documenting everything while waiting for the perfect moment, let's discuss in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs to stand up for the truth.